Section 12, Chapter 8, Part 2 of the Life and Adventures of Kit Carson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Schampf. The Life and Adventures of Kit Carson by DeWitt C. Peters. Section 12, Chapter 8, Part 2. Once more Colonel Fremont started with his small party in advance of his main body. He marched about 8 days' journey ahead, Fitzpatrick following up his trail with the larger division. At this time the expedition was journeying in the direction of the mouth of the Columbia River. In due time they arrived safely at the River Dalles. Here they made another brief halt. Colonel Fremont left Kit Carson in command of this camp, while he, with a small party, proceeded to Vancouver's Island and purchased some provisions. On his return, he found the whole party had become consolidated. The command now journeyed to Tlamath Lake in Oregon Territory. The descriptions of these journeys have already been given to the public in several forms, all, however, based upon Colonel Fremont's reports made to the U.S. Government. It would be superfluous, therefore, for us to fill up the pages of the life of Kit Carson with matter already published beyond the occurrences appertaining to him. Having finished the observations upon Tlamath Lake, the expedition started for California. The route led through a barren and desolate country, rendering game scarce. As the command drew near to the Sierra Nevada mountains, they were found to be entirely covered with deep snow throughout the entire range of vision. At this time the provisions had commenced giving out. Game was so scarce that it could not be depended on. The propositions which presented themselves at this crisis were to cross the mountains or take the fearful chance of starving to death. Crossing the mountains, terrible though the alternative, was the choice of all. It was better than inactivity and certain death. On arriving at the mountains, the snow was found to be about 6 feet deep on a level. The first task was to manufacture snowshoes for the entire party. By the aid of these foot appendages, an advance party was sent on to explore the route and to determine how far a path would have to be broken for the animals. This party reached a spot from whence they could see their way clear, and found that the path for the animals would be 3 leagues in length. The advance party also saw, in the distance, the green valley of the Sacramento and the Coast Range of mountains. Kit Carson was the first man to recognize these, to the snow-bound travelers, desirable localities, although it was now 17 years since he had last gazed upon them. The advance party then returned to their friends in the rear, and reported their proceedings. All were delighted on learning that they had one man among them who knew where they were. The business of making the road was very laborious. The snow had to be beaten compact with mallets. It was 15 days before the party succeeded in reaching, with a few of their animals, a place where the heavy work of the route was ended. During this time, many of the mules had starved to death, and the few remaining were driven to such an extreme by want of food that they devoured one another's tails, the leather on the pack saddles, and, in fact, they would try to eat everything they could get into their mouths. The sufferings of the men had been as severe as had ever fallen to the lot of any mountaineer present. Their provisions were all used, and they were driven to subsist upon the mules as they died from hunger. But the commander and all bore these terrible trials in an exemplary manner. An incident is related by Colonel Fremont in which Kit Carson enjoyed a cold bath, which occurred during this terrible march. February 23rd. This was our most difficult day. We were forced off the ridges by the quantity of snow among the timber, and obliged to take to the mountain sides, where occasionally rocks and a southern exposure afforded us a chance to scramble along. But these were steep and slippery with snow and ice, and the tough evergreens of the mountain impeded our way, tore our skins, and exhausted our patience. Some of us had the misfortune to wear moccasins with parfleche soles, so slippery that we could not keep our feet, and generally crawled across the snow beds. Axes and mauls were necessary today to make a road through the snow. Going ahead with Carson to reconnoiter the road, we reached in the afternoon the river which made the outlet of the lake. Carson sprang over, clear across a place where the stream was compressed among the rocks. But the parfleche soles of my moccasins glanced from the icy rock and precipitated me into the river. It was some few seconds before I could recover myself in the current, and Carson, thinking me hurt, jumped in after me, and we both had an icy bath. We tried to search a while for my gun, which had been lost in the fall, but the cold drove us out, and making a large fire on the bank, after we had partially dried ourselves, we went back to meet the camp. We afterwards found that the gun had been slung under the ice which lined the banks of the creek. It was while undergoing such experience as we have endeavored to narrate that the characters of men show forth in their true light and can be fully analyzed. John C. Fremont never was found wanting in times such as tried men's hearts. He was worthy of the trust reposed in him. His was no ordinary command. The men he had to deal with, in their line, had no superiors on the American continent. Yet he proved a match for any one of them, and gained from them the name of being a good mountaineer, an encomium they are not prone to bestow lightly. The party now commenced descending the mountains. On reaching the valley beneath, Fremont, taking Kit Carson and 6 of the men, pushed on in advance, in order to reach Sutter's Fort, where he would be able to purchase provisions. Fitzpatrick was left in charge of the main party, with orders to make easy marches. The second day after this division was made, Mr. Preuss, Fremont's assistant, accidentally got lost. His friends began making search for him. This failing, they traveled on slowly, fired guns, and used every means in their power to let their whereabouts be known to him. After wandering about for 4 days, to the surprise and joy of his companions, he came into camp. During his absence, he had subsisted on acorns and roots, and as a matter of course, was nearly exhausted both in body and mind. 3 days after Mr. Preuss was restored to them, Fremont, with the advance party, reached Sutter's Fort. He and his party were very hospitably received. They were entertained with the best the post could furnish, by its kind-hearted proprietor. Never did men more deserve such treatment. The condition of all was about as miserable as it could well be imagined for men who retained their hold on life. It was at Sutter's Fort, as most of our readers will remember, that the great gold mines of California first received their kindling spark, the discovery of that precious metal having been made there. While some men were digging a mill race, the alluring deposit first appeared. This event has made the fort world renowned. At the time we describe Fremont on his second expedition, nothing whatever was known of the immense fields of treasure over which he and his men daily walked, although for many years previous to the discovery being made, the mountaineers had trapped all the rivers in that vicinity, and on their banks had herded their animals for months together. They had drank thousands of times from the pure water as it flowed in the river's channel, and no doubt, frequently their eyes had penetrated through it until they saw the sand beneath, in which, perchance, the sparkling specks may have occasionally allured them sufficiently to recall the proverb that all is not gold that glitters. The writer once made inquiry of one of these mountaineers who had spent 2 summers in the manner narrated above, near and at Sutter's Fort, some 20 years since. He was asked whether he ever saw there anything in the shape of gold which in any way aroused his suspicions. His reply was, "Never, and had I, it would have been only for a brief space of time, as finally I should have been certain that I was deluded and mistaken, without there having been the eagle of our country stamped upon it." Provisions were immediately obtained at the fort and carried to Fitzpatrick and his party. Great difficulty had now to be encountered to prevent the men from losing their lives by the sudden change from want to comparative luxury. Notwithstanding, the utmost care was taken. Some of the party lost their reason. The hardships of the journey had proven too much for them. Fitzpatrick and the main body arrived at the fort in a few days, where they were likewise welcomed by its hospitable and generous proprietor, Captain Sutter. His name in California has ever been but another term for kindness and sympathy for the unfortunate. This expedition, in one respect only, can be called unfortunate. When the terrible sufferings of the commander and his men have been named, the catalogue of misfortune is ended. Its results, grand and glorious, have immortalized the name of every man who assisted in any way to accomplish it. I belong to the several exploring expeditions of John C. Fremont, is the keynote to the respect and homage of the American nation. The truth would be equally real, if we add, to the whole civilized world. Every heart which beats with admiration for the heroic, or which is capable of appreciating the rich contributions to the sciences, direct results from their terrible sufferings, has thrilled with delight when possessed of the history which records the brilliant achievements of these exploring parties. The band started from the little town of Kansas on the 29th day of May, 1843. It returned to the United States in August, 1844. After traveling 1,700 miles, it reached, September 6th, Salt Lake. On the 4th day of November, it reached Fort Vancouver, on the Columbia River. On the 6th day of March, 1844, it reached Sutter's Fort, in the destitute condition already explained. The distance from Fort Hall by the route taken is about 2,000 miles. The party remained at Sutter's Fort until the 24th day of March, or, as Kit Carson expresses the time from his memory, the expedition remained at this place about 1 month. At the expiration of this time, the party was sufficiently recruited to be ready for the return journey, which they commenced in April, 1844. Just previous to their taking leave of Mr. Sutter, 2 of the company became deranged, owing to the privations and fasting to which they had been obliged to submit before being ushered into the land of plenty. They had indulged appetite too freely, and brought on one of those strange revolutions in the brain's action which never fails to excite the pity of friend and foe. The first warning which the party had that one of the men was laboring under a disordered intellect occurred in the following manner. Early in the morning, the man suddenly started from his sleep, and began to ask his companions where his riding animal was gone. During this time it was by him, but he did not know it. Unknown to the rest of the party, he started off, soon after, in search of this imaginary animal. As soon as his absence had become known to Fremont, he surmised the truth and sent persons in all directions to hunt for him. They searched the neighboring country for many miles and made inquiries of all the friendly Indians they chanced upon, but failed to discover him. Several days of delay was caused by this most unhappy circumstance. Finally, it became necessary for the party to depart without him. Word was left with Mr. Sutter to continue the hunt. He did so most faithfully, and by his exertions, some time after the party had set out on the return trip, the maniac was found and kept at the fort until he had entirely recovered. He was then, on the first opportunity, provided with a passage to the United States. Before we follow the party on their homeward bound tramp, it is proper that the reader should be favored with the estimate and views which the American historian, statesman, and scholar, Colonel Benton, has recorded concerning the perils undergone and the results accomplished by this expedition. His pen is so graphic and lifelike that the reader will doubtless thank us for the extract. Besides presenting a view of the expedition, it will unfold a fact which shows where the origin of the expedition had its conception. We give all he says concerning the expedition. The government deserves credit for the zeal with which it pursued geographical discovery. Such is the remark which a leading paper made upon the discoveries of Fremont on his return from his second expedition to the Great West, and such is the remark which all writers will make upon his discoveries who will write history from public documents and outside views. With all such writers, the expeditions of Fremont will be credited to the zeal of the government for the promotion of science, as if the government under which he acted had conceived and planned these expeditions, as Mr. Jefferson did that of Lewis and Clark, and then selected this young officer to carry into effect the instructions delivered to him. How far such history would be true in relation to the first expedition, which terminated in the Rocky Mountains, has been seen in the account which has been given of the origin of that undertaking, and which leaves the government innocent of its conception, and therefore not entitled to the credit of its authorship, but only to the merit of permitting it. In the second and greater expedition, from which great political as well as scientific results have flowed, their merit is still less, for while equally innocent of its conception, they were not equally passive to its performance, countermanding the expedition after it had begun, and lavishing censure upon the adventurous young explorer for his manner of undertaking it. The fact was, that his first expedition barely finished, Mr. Fremont sought and obtained orders for a second one, and was on the frontier of Missouri with his command when orders arrived at St. Louis to stop him, on the ground that he had made a military equipment which the peaceful nature of this geographical pursuit did not require. As if Indians did not kill and rob scientific men as well as others, if not in a condition to defend themselves. The particular point of complaint was that he had taken a small mountain howitzer, in addition to his rifles, and which, he was informed, was charged to him, although it had been furnished upon a regular requisition on the commandant of the arsenal at St. Louis, approved by the commander of the military department, Colonel (afterward General) Kearney. Mr. Fremont had left St. Louis, and was at the frontier, Mrs. Fremont being requested to examine the letters that came after him, and forward those which he ought to receive. She read the countermanding orders and detained them, and Fremont knew nothing of their existence until after he had returned from one of the most marvelous and eventful expeditions of modern times, one to which the United States are indebted, among other things, for the present ownership of California, instead of seeing it a British possession. The writer of this view, who was then in St. Louis, approved of the course which his daughter had taken, for she had stopped the orders before he knew it, and he wrote a letter to the department condemning the recall, repulsing the reprimand which had been lavished upon Fremont, and demanding a court-martial for him when he should return. The Secretary of War was then Mr. James Madison Porter of Pennsylvania, the chief of the topographical corps, the same as now Colonel Abert. Himself an office man, surrounded by West Point officers, to whose pursuit of easy service Fremont's adventurous expeditions was a reproach, and in conformity to whose opinions the Secretary seemed to have acted. On Fremont's return, upwards of a year afterwards, Mr. William Wilkins of Pennsylvania was Secretary of War, and received the young explorer with all honor and friendship, and obtained for him the brevet of captain from President Tyler. And such is the inside view of this piece of history, very different from what documentary evidence would make it. To complete his survey across the continent, on the line of travel between the State of Missouri and the tidewater region of the Columbia, was Fremont's object in this expedition. And it was all that he had obtained orders for doing, but only a small part, and to his mind an insignificant part, of what he proposed doing. People had been to the mouth of the Columbia before, and his ambition was not limited to making tracks where others had made them before him. There was a vast region beyond the Rocky Mountains, the whole western slope of the continent, of which but little was known, and of that nothing with the accuracy of science. All that vast region, more than 700 miles square, equal to a great kingdom in Europe, was an unknown land, a sealed book which he longed to open and to read. Leaving the frontier of Missouri in May, 1843, and often diverging from his route for the sake of expanding his field of observation, he had arrived in the tidewater region of Columbia in the month of November, and had then completed the whole service which his orders embraced. He might then have returned upon his tracks, or been brought home by sea, or hunted the most pleasant path for getting back, and if he had been a routine officer, satisfied with fulfilling an order, he would have done so. Not so the young explorer, who held his diploma from nature, and not from the United States Military Academy. He was at Fort Vancouver, guest of the hospitable Dr. McLaughlin, governor of the British Hudson Bay Fur Company, and obtained from him all possible information upon his intended line of return, faithfully given, but which proved to be disastrously erroneous in its leading and governing feature. A southeast route to cross the great unknown region diagonally through its heart, making a line from the lower Columbia to the upper Colorado of the Gulf of California, was his line of return. 25 men, the same who had come with him from the United States, and 100 horses were his equipment, and the commencement of winter the time of starting, all without a guide, relying on their guns for support, and in the last resort upon their horses, such as should give out, for one that could carry a man or a pack could not be spared for food. All the maps up to that time had shown this region traversed from east to west, from the base of the Rocky Mountains to the Bay of San Francisco, by a great river called the Buenaventura, which may be translated the Good Chance. Governor McLaughlin believed in the existence of this river, and made out a conjectural manuscript map to show its place and course. Fremont believed in it, and his plan was to reach it before the dead of winter, and then hibernate upon it. As a great river, he knew that it must have some rich bottoms, covered with wood and grass, where the animals would collect and shelter when the snows and freezing winds drove them from the plains. And with these animals to live on, and the grass for the horses and wood for fires, he expected to avoid suffering, if not to enjoy comfort during his solitary sojourn in that remote and profound wilderness. He proceeded. Soon encountered deep snows which impeded progress upon the highlands, descended into a low country to the left, afterwards known to be the Great Basin, from which no water issues to any sea, skirted an enormous chain of mountain on the right, luminous with glittering white snow, saw strange Indians who mostly fled, found a desert, no Buenaventura, and death from cold and famine staring him in the face. The failure to find the river, or tidings of it, and the possibility of its existence seeming to be forbid by the structure of the country, and hibernation in the inhospitable desert being impossible, and the question being that of life and death, some new plan of conduct became indispensable. His celestial observations told him that he was in the latitude of the Bay of San Francisco, and only 70 miles from it. But what miles! Up and down that snowy mountain which the Indians told him no men could cross in the winter, which would have snow upon it as deep as the trees, and places where people would slip off and fall half a mile at a time, a fate which actually befell a mule, packed with the precious burden of botanical specimens collected along a travel of 2,000 miles. No reward could induce an Indian to become a guide in that perilous adventure of crossing this mountain. All recoiled and fled from the adventure. It was attempted without a guide, in the dead of winter, accomplished in 40 days. The men and surviving horses, a woeful procession, crawling along one by one, skeleton men leading skeleton horses, and arriving at Sutter's settlement in the beautiful valley of the Sacramento, and where a genial warmth, and budding flowers, and trees in foliage, and grassy ground, and flowing streams, and comfortable food, made a fairy contrast with the famine and freezing they had encountered, and the lofty Sierra Nevada which they had climbed. Here he rested and recruited, and from this point, and by the way of Monterey, the first tidings were heard of the party since leaving Fort Vancouver. Another long progress to the south, skirting the western base of the Sierra Nevada, made him acquainted with the noble valley of the San Joaquin, counterpart to that of the Sacramento. When crossing through a gap and turning to the left, he skirted the Great Basin, and by many deviations from the right line home, levied incessant contributions to science from expanded lands, not described before. In this eventful exploration, all the great features of the western slope of our continent were brought to light. The Great Salt Lake, the Utah Lake, the Little Salt Lake, at all which places, then deserts, the Mormons now are, the Sierra Nevada, then solitary in the snow, now crowded with Americans digging gold from its flanks, the beautiful valleys of the Sacramento and San Joaquin, then alive with wild horses, elk, deer, and wild fowls, now smiling with American cultivation, the Great Basin itself and its contents, the 3 parks, the approximation of the great rivers which, rising together in the central region of the Rocky Mountains, go off east and west towards the rising and setting sun. All these and other strange features of a new region, more Asiatic than American, were brought to light and revealed to the public view in the result of this exploration. 11 months he was never out of sight of snow, and sometimes, freezing with cold, would look down upon a sunny valley, warm with genial heat. Sometimes, panting with the summer's heat, would look up at the eternal snows which crown the neighboring mountain. But it was not then that California was secured to the Union, to the greatest power of the New World, to which it of right belonged. But it was the first step towards the acquisition, and one that led to it. The second expedition led to a third, just in time to snatch the golden California from the hands of the British, ready to clutch it. But of this hereafter. Fremont's second expedition was now over. He had left the United States a fugitive from his government, and returned with a name that went over Europe and America and with discoveries bearing fruit which the civilized world is now enjoying. On their homeward bound journey, the party followed up the valley of the San Joaquin, crossing over the Sierra Nevada and Coast Range of mountains at a point where they join and form a beautiful low pass. They continued on from here close under the Coast Range until they struck the Spanish Trail. This they followed to the Mojave River. That stream, it will be recollected, was an old friend of Kit Carson's. The reader will recall that many times he had caught beaver out of its waters. They followed the trail up the course of the river to where it leaves it. At this point an event occurred which somewhat retarded their progress, relieving the monotony of the route and somewhat changing their plans. Soon after the camp had been formed, they were visited by a Mexican man and a boy, the one named Andres Fuentes, the other Pablo Hernandez. They informed Fremont that they belonged to a party of Mexican traders which had come from New Mexico. They said that 6 of them, including in this number 2 women who acted as cooks, had been left by their friends in charge of a band of horses. The rest of the party were absent trafficking. The party of 6 thus left to watch the horses consisted of Santiago Giacome, Andres Fuentes and his wife, and Pablo Hernandez, together with his father and mother. They were endeavoring to find better grazing for their animals. For this purpose they had penetrated the country as far as they dared, and, at about 80 miles from the camp of Fremont, had resolved to wait for their friends. Fuentes and the boy Pablo were on guard over the animals when their camp was attacked by hostile savages. The attacking band was about 30 in number. Their principal object was to seize the horses. To effect this the more easily, they saluted the little band with a flight of arrows as they advanced. Fuentes and Pablo now heard Giacome warn them to start the horses and run for it. Both were mounted. They obeyed the direction of Giacome, and with the entire band of horses charged boldly into the midst of the Indians regardless of their weapons. The charge succeeded in breaking their line, through which Fuentes and Pablo boldly dashed after their animals. The Indians deferred the chase to attend to a more bloody purpose. Having put 60 miles between them and the site of the attack, they left their horses and started in search of their main body. This search led them into Fremont's camp. Fuentes feared that the worst had overtaken his wife. Pablo already looked upon himself as an orphan boy. He doubted not that the bloody savages had murdered both his father and mother. It was a sad picture to witness their grief, but Kit Carson could not do so unmoved. The heart of such grief has ever awakened his earnest sympathy. His sympathy, too, has never been of a wordy nature. He volunteered to go with Fuentes and make an attempt to deliver the captives, if such they should prove, or to avenge their death, if that became the sad alternative. End of Section 12, Chapter 8, Part 2.